Hello, another episode of Catch Up to Contenders, this time tackling China, the Enigma region I think everyone has a bad idea of China. They've been missold. Anybody who's watched, actually, have they been missold? I don't know, we'll get onto that later. But anybody who's watched the Shanghai Dragons throughout the entirety of the Overwatch League must just think China is a hot mess, a garbage can, a disaster zone. But there have been good teams to come out of China before. Most people will be thinking of Miraculous Youngster, actually the only top Chinese team that's ever really done well in a major tournament outside of that kind of stuff against the Koreans and these kind of things. But China is a region that I enjoyed watching last season, but I got to be honest with you guys, I have not watched any of this season. So I've brought in the experts. So I'm actually just looking at my screen to see which order I've got everybody in. But I've got the Rapture, who does casting for Broadcast.gg. I've then got Kenobi as well, who also does casting for Broadcast.gg. And I've got Ryan Central, who does... are you actually under some kind of brand name when you do casting of Chinese contenders?
Broadcast GG.
Yeah, Broadcast GG.
Oh, there we go. They've got everybody under that banner.
Squad. Yeah.
Me and the other content creator, like one amongst many, we're doing like our own sort of casting stuff with something else. And then we got invited to do up a division for Europe, and then they were like, "Hey, do you want to do China as well?" So it's been a really nice concentrated stepping stone for casters anyway. So if you're interested in casting, that's the place to go for sure.
There you go. And you can become an expert on a region that a lot of other people don't pay as much attention to. I think that's fair, But with the rumors, I've got to say rumors, of what's the... I've got to learn the pronunciation of this city, but I think it's Guangzhou.
Guangzhou.
I'm not.
I think the last syllable is like Joe. That's the one that I remember the most, like Guangzhou.
Right. But with reports of a new city being based in China and Shanghai already there, I think it's going to be a region that the spotlight should be on a little bit more, right? But do you think that there could be two Owl caliber teams to come out of Contenders China?
We have one already. It's Lucky Future Guangzhou. Just Lucky Future Zenith. That's the team right there.
That's true, but as we'll get onto later, they don't have too many Chinese players in Lucky Future.
No, they don't.
Guangzhou.
But I mean, are you looking for Chinese players or to win? That's the real situation right there.
Okay, we're getting real.
I think
already.
That's the case for a lot of teams. So it doesn't matter if it's in China, any former team that may be coming into the Overwatch League Season 2 has that decision to make it. It's not an easy one. Like London's a perfect example of a team that upset a lot of European fans for having a full Korean roster, definitely. Being the only European team. So it wouldn't surprise me if there is an Amsterdam or a Paris and they do the exact same thing. It's going to be entertaining to watch. But there is certainly Overwatch League caliber talent in there. Maybe not just as the teams on their own, I think is the main thing.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say it's like if you took the best players from the top 3 teams and mixed them into like a super team, you'd probably get something that would at least be better than 0-40. So
you literally have to be better than 0-40.
The bar's not
set. That will never happen again.
You would say that before the first season, but here we are.
That's true. That is very true. Yeah. But if you've got like multiple really bad teams, someone's got to win.
Yeah, that's true.
All right,
they have to play each other. So.
That'll be a game. I think Shanghai and Guangzhou would be an amazing. If it's like they've both lost all of their games so far, that will be entertaining. That'll be the best match.
I brought you guys in to hype up China, for God's sake, and immediately we're going down the wrong path.
Yeah, but you buried it early. Like, no one watches it, this and that. I mean, we can't.
We're taking the handoff energy right here.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough.
At least I'm like East Coast for like me and Kenobi. You're East Coast, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like 5-6 a.m. in the morning for these games. So like the people who come to watch these matches are already up for other Overwatch. They're already up for like Korean contenders. They're up for probably later for European contenders. They don't sleep. So you see like the same familiar faces tuning into China, which is cool. But it has some diamonds in the rough here and there. Some of the matches have actually been pretty solid. Of course, it has its wipes like any region. But like the T1W, LFZ, Lingon Esports, and now like LGD really make for some good games. I would say you'd be doing yourself a bit of a disservice, just anyone in general, to not watch any of it. To catch like now, I would say playoffs is probably when you want to tune in.
Yes, and last season I did enjoy watching the Chinese playoffs a lot because what I was really fascinated about was that I kind of assumed if you have Korean teams or teams with a lot of Korean players in a region, they're probably going to dominate. So I was looking at Lucky Future Zenith from last season. I can't remember. I think Legend Young Beyond were also in last season with a full Korean roster. Am I right there? I seem to remember them playing.
Sounds right.
Yeah, and
so.
they ended up not doing that well, and it was actually LGD that looked like one of the best teams in the region. They were like on par with Lucky Future Zenith, it seemed. And so that was really promising to me to see these new Chinese players kind of rise up and be really, well, I suppose some of them aren't actually new. A lot of them were, were really good in the past as well. So when you've been watching this season of Contenders, what stood out to you? Is it the case that, as I would assume, that kind of Lucky Future Zenith with their big Korean roster that used to be playing in the Pacific region with guys like DM and Usta, are they just dominating? Are there other Chinese teams that are able to put up a fight? Who are the people to look out for?
Kenobi, you take away that one because I feel like I already know it. I feel we already discussed this before we started recording, so I'll let you go first because I already.
I think one of the things I noticed from casting and just watching Contenders is just how hectic it is and how DPS driven the region is. That's not to say like tanks and supports don't have their spot, but it's very reliant on those two DPS, right? You always have your Michael Jordan and your Scottie Pippen. You need those two, and that's why I think Lucky Future has had this very good kind of mentality so far, where it's you can't just beat that one player. You need to beat DM and Erster, and then if you beat them, you still have 4 other players behind you that are still just as good. So a lot of it's very 1v1 matchup on paper, right? If my DPS is better than your DPS, we have a better chance, and then so on and so forth. So I think the region is just very 1v1 solo QE kind of. There's not a lot of team play that much. It's very hectic. The reason Lucky Future Zenith does so well though is because they have kind of this mesh, right? This like they're just a giant ball of death that just runs at you and they just kill you. And like today we saw it against HTP. They'll even just style on you. They'll BM you in spawn. They just have such a great, well-oiled machine, and they really probably are the titans probably of Chinese Contenders so far.
I think that's greatly emphasized as well with the 1v1 and having carrier potential with the meta that we've just come out of with a lot of Widowmaker. So like a lot of the teams, I think LGD is a perfect example of that. I remember the first game that we casted was them and Lucky Future, and it was like a reverse sweep, literally because LGD were 2-0 down, then Shy just seemed to wake up. And suddenly he was in control of that game. Granted, Lucky Future switched out their on-form Widowmaker player for Sleepwalker, and that sort of fell apart. This meta coming into it in the playoffs, some teams have been very focused on trying to run Sombra a lot, and it's very like Korean orientated. They're the carry player, they're in control. And then you have some teams just running Goats comp and not really moving to much else because maybe they're uncomfortable with the shift and the change in certain areas. We haven't seen a lot of diversity in, not a lot of Hammond, for example, little bits of Sombras depending on teams. But overall, just a lot of Goats comp whilst teams just don't want to get caught out in this stage, I feel.
Sombra is, at least in playoffs, such a like a linchpin character, especially between like LGE and LGD. It came down a lot to like Eileen versus Undead on the Sombra. Yeah, obviously those DPS picks are really important. I think a big distinction between a lot of these teams is that 3 or 4 of the teams, again, T1W, LFZ, LGD, and LGE, and to an extent Flag Gaming, are actual set plays. Like it seems like they're going for obvious maneuvers towards the point. They're not playing that like we're gonna jostle at the choke point and look for ult charge and then, well, we got to pick, let's go in, which I would say the rest of the groups pretty much do. So you'll see like LGD, you have Eileen, who's not just playing like in the backline like Undead and like harassing. He's hacking tanks so the rest of his team can get free ult charge. He's hacking the Pharah so as far as an easier Pharah battle. Those individual set plays and those character masters are really pivotal in this region. You have a really good Sombra, you almost practically win the sets. You have a really good Hanzo or Widowmaker. You have a player that has, you know, the value of 3 or 4 different players. So it's definitely a mix of like those character masters who have not only good hero pools, but are really good on one specific character that a team can rely on in like a situation where they might be scrambling for kills or scrambling to get objectives. And then also having set plays versus just we're going to build ult charge, hesitate, and we got to pick, let's go in, which a lot of these other teams really default to very quickly, especially like after Control, where you can get away with that more often. Once you start going into the other game types, a lot of these teams kind of fall apart.
The meta in Chinese Contenders, or in general in Chinese Overwatch, has always been really weird. Like, even when we dialed back to, I can't even remember, what was it called? OWPS is what the Overwatch Premier Series is what was running in China before Contenders. And they were running very strange things compared to the rest of the world. They were dabbling with Sombra before she was meta. They played a lot around like McCree players when nobody
China
else was doing
McCree.
that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it is. They really like McCree. They really like Genji. They were doing like glass cannon compositions with like one tank, and then like I think today it was HTP versus HTP. They played LFZ. they were I believe it was Lucky Futures at it, like they were running, and even HGP at times, like a Reaper 76 tracer with 1 tank. So they're at times very willing to go flexibility, to be very flexible to enable their DPS and throw a lot of DPS down, and then also going for like goats. So yeah, this region loves to play around with some weird stuff, but then ultimately they're like, all right, this wrecking ball is not really working. We're just gonna go to something a little safer once it stops working.
Do you think that experimentation is to their credit, or is it because they're kind of all over the place and it's very chaotic?
I think it's
little
interesting
bit of both.
because
Yeah.
a little bit. I think it's interesting because when the season started, it was a lot of, China really loves their dive Widow Genji. Like if ever anything goes wrong, they always just go back to dive Widow Genji. It's like their bread and butter, what they would always play. And sometimes they would try to play Brigitte, but they just didn't know how to do it. Their, shield dashes weren't being used effectively on enemy Genjis. It just was a bit of a mess. And then as the season went on, they seemed to adapt. So they take a little while to adapt to these new characters. But today it's interesting because today, Sombra played very well on certain teams, on other teams not as well. But they kind of do always have this idea to revert back to whatever their comfort is. And in the old meta, that kind of favored them with everyone was just running, everybody ran Widow Genji dive. That was one of the things everyone had in their back pocket. So in this meta, it doesn't really favor that too much.
Something that I'm looking at when I look at the playoffs is that we seem to have had what you would think of as upsets if you'd looked at the regular table. So you'd had big names like Team CC, who've got players on them like Jikarian and Late Young, who people would remember from Miraculous Youngster, who did well in the regular season, and Moss 7 Club, who did well in the regular season, but ended up getting beaten out by teams who were a little lower down. Now, T1W have been good for quite a while. I think they were like the 3rd best team in the previous season of Contenders. But Flag Gaming were 4th in Group A. So are these big upsets, or was one group just a lot better than the other?
Ryan, I feel like you were raring to say something because
we were talking about this before we started up.
Yeah,
Group
B was free.
Group
B was free. That's why you're seeing that, man. It was
the
free.
amazing thing for Group B is that the top 3 teams went out with a match score of 3-2, and then the bottom 3 teams were 2-3. It was very close between them, but you have sort of patchy areas like Team CC. LG Gaming is a firm example of a team that can do well. It wouldn't surprise me to see LGD Gaming in the finals again, but like they have had some real bad inconsistencies. And Moss Club 7 top of the group, I think, just shows like what kind of group that was. Moss 7 Club, man, that is a difficult. I just go to like the S Club 7 sort of.
You want to break out into the dancing
great
song,
tribute band. Yeah. That's the only region it's missing, but they're a team that likes to run the crazy shit. It's like the epitome of Chinese contenders bringing out the Bastion on attack when they're going into like Goats comp. It's magical, but I think Group A was really stacked with the teams that were in there. Lucky Future Zenith, Lincoln Esports, T1W, Flag Gaming. All of those 4 teams really stood out and played well amongst each other. And in a sense, it's almost like scrimming and preparing for this. So the fact that Group A is winning out completely over Group B, apart from LGD Gaming, I don't think really surprised anybody.
I think the interesting thing as well, though, is that Lingan Esports went 4-1 in the regular season and then ended up losing to LGD. And is this more of the case of LGD coming alive in the playoffs? Did they underperform in the group stages? Or what's the difference here? Why is the 3rd place team of Group B the one to provide the upset over Group A?
Could be that LGD just preferred this meta, honestly.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason.
Maybe they didn't because the tempo was really slow last time. They were relying a lot on big plays coming out with Shy. This time, I feel like Shy and Eileen as DPS really bounce off each other really well. But when you're playing this, like, you have to get picks before fights even started. I realized this when casting too, how much different the tempo was, that you're sort of expecting a pick and then an engagement, but how aggressive some of the teams were playing in general was really surprising and had to keep you on your toes. So LGD Gaming, I think, are just really versatile and diverse in different styles and metas, and they can rely on Eileen and Shy a little bit more, especially when you have like a Sombra on your team in those areas. That's where they really like to work. Lincoln Esports, maybe to an extent, just couldn't keep up. They looked really good on Eichenwald. That was the map that they won in a 3-1 fashion, but LGD just looked a bit more composed. They looked a bit battered and bruised. This season hasn't been the best for them in the group stages, but this is where it counts, right? They could just go all the way and sort of play through this if they can.
You agree with that? You agree with that sentiment?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see like what Sombra has brought to this meta, because I feel like Undead, we know like Overwatch League, Undead, played that McCree, played that Widow. Today didn't play McCree pretty much at all, was stuck more on the Sombra. And it's interesting to see in China, there's two types of Sombras, like the style play wise. There's a Sombra who is hacking the tanks, going after, like Rapture said, hacking the Pharahs, playing more of that, utility. And then there's ones that go into the back line and play aggressive and try to, one-shot the Zen, get them out of the fight, trade your life for 2 lives of the others. And Undead today, it seemed like he didn't really know how to play, like what type of Sombra he wanted to play. There were times where he would go into the back line, and then there were times where he would try and get the tanks, and it ended up making him a little bit less useful. And, he was not farming EMP as fast as Shy or Eileen were when they were playing Sombra. So Undead maybe got a little bit, because in Link on Esports, their MO so far has been like, we need to be carried by Undead. He's like Undead, as we say, like he needs to be the guy who we're putting all of our resources to. And then when you're Sombra, you can't, it's very hard to do that. You play more of a solo style. You're not really with your team that often. So I think they got a little bit screwed over by the meta, based on what I saw today. And it seems like LGD, like Ryan said, adapts a lot better to this meta than LGE did.
I want to chime in on that because I agree that, all right, 2 different play styles of Sombra, but what made Eileen really good is that he did both very well. When you watched Undead play, you could see he got into the backline and wasn't like sure what target he was going to go for until he got there. It's like, oh, Zenyatta's the closest target, I'm going to go after them, despite the fact that there's a Mercy already pocketing. Like things like that, and taking too long to make the backline push effective. Whereas Eileen was doing a really good job of being on the front line, hacking necessary targets, and then getting back into the backline, making that effective harassment quick, and then getting back out. And you saw how like fruitful that was for Eileen, because he was constantly ahead in EMP charge. So in that respect, yeah, you can't put everything on Undead, but Undead like wasn't playing to like the multifaceted level of Eileen, and it was really exciting to see like how good Eileen was at like not dying, not wasting too much time, being in the right position to hack a diva, to hack a Winston. Like, oh, that Winston's like just as been, was off cooldown for a couple seconds, hack immediately. You're still locked down for another 7 seconds or so. Like that like adds up a lot. Whereas Undead, oh, I'm taking too long. There was a point on Anubis where like he went after supports and got like mowed down 3 times in a row. And you can't really have that happen. So like, at that point, LGD was just playing on all cylinders across the board, but their players individually aren't stuck to like one play style. And that gives you more traction over the course of a set when you're using the same character throughout many different maps. So
I think that was a big difference for Lucky Future Zenith as well. It was almost as if they were on the opposite end of the spectrum to LGD, which would make it a really interesting final if both these teams got into it, because LGD really enjoyed the meta that they were in. It wasn't just Sombra that they played all the time. They played lots of different strategies, and it really complemented the DPS and the tanks as well. The tanks for LGD, I think, are like Overwatch League caliber.
Really good.
For sure.
Really
like
good.
As a full team, it kind of reminds me of like FNRGFE before they sort of became, it's that sort of like main husk of a team that they could build around, and then having a DPS there to sort of pop off as well. For Lucky Future Zenith, whilst they looked the dominant team and looked firm favorites, when they came into this meta, they could honestly play the same comps that they ran in this patch from the last patch too. They didn't change it up. They had double snipers. They had Widowmaker Genji, Orisa. There wasn't an awful lot of change, and it seems that, well, it worked for us last patch. We seem pretty dominant in comparison to everybody else. We don't need to change up too much. Whereas I think LGD were more like, this is great. We can practice with this. We can catch some teams out. And I feel that they're the 2 teams that I'm looking forward to, because you have one team that's, sticking to their guns, and one team that's really relishing the opportunity for change.
Yeah, I would like to see that finals, like LFZ versus LGD.
It'd be a repeat. It's a repeat of last year.
Yeah,
or last season.
Last season was actually pretty close as well, right?
It was a 5-game set.
Yeah, so I'd love to see that happen again. Do you think that is the most likely outcome of the playoffs at this point?
I think so. I think LFZ versus T1W is probably going to be a 3-0 or 3-1. T1W is the only team to take a map off of LFZ in the entire regular season, but that only goes so far. So like it's just a single map really. Otherwise, like I mean LFZ is probably going to beat them up. Flag Gaming, they look really good coming off of the win off of Moss 7, but we've already gone into how Moss 7 was kind of, the tallest of a very short group of people. So I think in that respect, I think LGD has the stamina too. They can run away with the set very well. And then so far, I haven't found really any way for any team that has figured out LFZ so far. I think right now everyone's like, oh, the patch is going to beat LFZ. That's how we're going to win this, especially coming off of Overwatch League Grand Finals where that just happened to NYXL. I think everyone's like, oh, new patch. We know what happens when we get a new patch. Not that that's necessarily wrong. I mean, we know like a patch being thrown down right before playoffs, like that's not ideal,
definitely.
obviously. Yeah. But that being said, other than the patch, like let's say there was no patch being thrown down, there's really almost no reason to assume LFC wouldn't win. So I'm not entirely sold that the patch is going to be enough to like shorten the gap between these teams. It'll certainly be helpful, especially in LGD's case, as Ryan and Kenobi have already gone into, that they're a very flexible team. But LFZ's like on an individual level, their players excel like almost all the time. You can rely on all those players to be popping off at any given moment. And I think that transcends patches to an extent. So I'm interested to see how the patch will figure it out, but I would like to see that rematch. I would like to see how both of these teams come together. I think that would make the most exciting matchup, and it's probably the most likely given how the brackets worked out so far.
I think the thing with Lucky Future Zenith is the thing that has the most opportunity to get them beat is themselves, because I think they have this sort of air of overconfidence, which you're not 19.
Have you talked to them?
You're not, but like, did you see today's game against HTP? Like I
did, but okay, all right. They should beat HTP, right? HTP is the gatekeeper of Chinese contenders. They beat the teams they're supposed to beat, and they lose to the teams they're supposed to lose to. So, like,
but they have an air of overconfidence, is what I'm saying. Is like,
where do you get that from?
The way they played today.
Did you call them up and be like, "Hey guys, chill it down a little bit. You're getting a little cocky out there." Right?
It looked. I mean,
especially because it was like the second round in Oasis. Like it was within the first 5 minutes, you have.
They just started styling on him, like in the spawn, like
that's
crouch 80 spamming.
I think they were doing that because of the fact that they're that much better than HTP. I don't think it has anything like you can be cocky when it doesn't matter. If you're cocky when it does matter, that's a big difference. I think they were never going to lose to HTP, and also you could be like, oh, he was just juking some shots from spawn, but obviously.
Yeah,
I mean, he pulse bombed the D.Va he pulse bombed right in front of spawn.
By the way, I just watched the VOD again. I thought that was really funny how he put the pulse bomb down in front and Labasco covered like, oh, he's just stalling him out. He wants the extra percent. I was like, nice. I like that. HTP is that gatekeeper team that LFZ had long surpassed those gates and shut the door on them. But hey, maybe you're right. Maybe they are a little cocky. This is the test though, because now that wasn't really a test. I think now when they actually play a team like T1W, who's already given them a little bit of a run for their money, we'll see if that translates over. I will admit that we probably won't see any more of that in this coming set.
T1, yeah,
but yeah.
T1W I think has the only blueprint, quote unquote, like maybe like a corner of the blueprint is left because they're the only team to beat them so far. The way they did that though was Crystal just had, I mean, it was one map and Crystal just popped off completely and just decimated the Erster and DM. That's the only thing that gives me pause is like there is this one game, and if T1W has this ability to recapture that kind of momentum that they had when they won that map and say like, okay, yeah, we've beaten this team before, we can do it again. Unfortunately for them, when they last played, as soon as they won that map, LFG just downloaded them for the rest of the series. So it wasn't very close besides that one map.
Sure.
And,
even if they get a bit overconfident, they can. Yeah. They've got a big buffer zone.
Yeah, they can come back and just say like, oh, okay, well, now we need to actually play the game.
So let's dive into LFZ a little bit because they're a really interesting team as far as I'm concerned. Because they didn't play in Apex after they dissolved Mighty AOD. The team split in two, and then they went to play in the Pacific region for a long time. Kind of the core of this team, right? With Michelle and DM and Erster. And the team seems to be built a lot around the DPS and playing a very scrappy style. And when I used to watch them in Pacific, in the Overwatch Pacific Championship, and then when I watched last season of Contenders China, it seems like they enjoy playing a lot of Genji Tracer dive. They play a very aggressive kind of style. It's very much based around like playing aggressive and Demoners kind of carrying the game. So has that style changed? Do I need to be updated on what's going on with Lucky Future Zenith? And what would you describe as their big strengths at the moment as a team?
I want to hear what Ryan thinks on that. I haven't heard him. Now that
Ryan,
go a little bit.
Lucky Future, I haven't had the opportunity to have much like sort of viewing of Lucky Future in terms of casting, but like certainly looking over the gate, like I had a brief look at the sort of playoffs and how teams played. The style of Lucky Future, they seemed really comfortable in just the really straightforward stuff. We're running Reinhardt Zarya a lot, Mercy Zenyatta. It looks like they're just really comfortable playing different strategies. You can sort of flick through VODs and see it doesn't change much as some other teams may switch onto like Farron stuff of different parts of Oasis. It's one of those teams that just looks leagues ahead. They look very Western with how they play as well. Like I think they'd suit playing in like NA Contenders fairly well. They just seem fairly consistent with what they're doing, but it's not as if you sort of look at different areas and go, they're popping off in like the DM is a great example. I want to see DM picked up by Philadelphia Fusion just so you have the DPS line of Carpe and DM.
Yes, that would be
But
fantastic.
Yeah.
They used to play together.
So that's the dream.
But it's one of those teams where I think going into it, because like we saw like the first match that I casted was LGD, and hearing that they got to the finals lost out to look, they've almost been villains to me to an extent. And certainly with the way that they painted themselves today, like with DM, just when people said like the styling, he was basically in the spawn doors of Hero Tacturn, pointing his bare ass at the team and just sort of like AD strafing with the blink, being like trying to sort of get the pot shot. So I think they look comfortable. They don't look phased when they get curveballs because, frankly, there haven't been many. And so you'd just assume that they would just coax through this. Like, I just look at some of the other teams. It could be a big upset because, as I've said, they're a team that haven't really experimented with a meta. But one thing that I think was worth highlighting is there's been a lot of different regions of Contenders where they've had the semifinals like the next day. Say if their semi-final was tomorrow, they may get cut out more, but they now have like 2 weeks to prepare for their semi-final because I think that's been played on LAN. Then they have the finals the next day. So
that's pretty good.
Yeah,
they have a lot of time to prepare to try stuff out. But then again, it does give other teams other opportunities to try out different stuff. But I feel if you were going to beat them, you need to have a different strategy to make out straight away. Yeah. They need to not be prepared, but having 2 weeks to have a play of this strategy, see what teams play in the World Cup in other regions of Contenders, because I feel like there is a little bit of copycatting. You know, Chinese Contenders likes to look at what the Overwatch League are running, try it themselves and fail dramatically, but they do like to look at what other regions are trying to run.
Rapture and I casted the one game actually where T1W did beat Lucky Future Zenith, and the way they did that was on the backs of Crystal. And you know, we talk about China. China's a very DPS heavy driven region, and Crystal that game basically by himself was able to take out Erster and DM. And so I think if you're able to recapture that, like I mentioned before, I said if you're able to capture that, you know, if you suppress them, you don't have to shut them down completely. Just suppress them so that DM and Erster can't pop off like they did today, where they just completely styled all over HTP. It was just a bloodbath. I think Crystal, and also to another extent, I think Crystal and Molanran are two DPS that can give DM and Erster a run for their money, especially with Molanran's Sombra today, which we saw was very, very good, had a very good understanding of how to play Sombra, where to be, had the scouting with the infinite stealth and getting those EMPs quickly. I think that's the one curveball that they can throw at them. But like Ryan said, you do have 2 weeks for Lucky Future Zenith, and they're going to go into their hyperbolic time chamber and just, you know, grind up until they get to that point where they're just going to be, they're going to be very comfortable with that meta. So I think it is going to be very difficult for T1W to do anything about it, just because Lucky Future Zenith has the coaching, they have the coordination, they just have the style to, you know, just go through this entire bracket.
They just don't look phased by everybody. You know,
anything.
Like NA Contenders has had such a shift. It's been amazing to watch, and some teams really relish in that. But the fact that Lucky Future Zenith have just kind of gone, we're just going to stick to this. They never really played stuff like Zenyatta Ana aggressively. It always just seemed to be the Mercy Zen. And I think that's a culprit of showing that this is a team that is just, we're so much better than everybody here. We don't need to change it much. Let's just go into it like this. So I think if other teams spot that, they can really exploit it.
Yeah, their fundamentals are really good. I think one thing that's very indicative of watching LFZ is they don't get like tunnel vision. I noticed a lot of teams, I think this is, you know, happens throughout all contenders and like contenders trials and open division, where the longer a fight goes on, it's easier to forget about a certain player in the fight. And so, you know, you'll start fighting for a while and then you'll forget that there's a Widowmaker that has an unmitigated sight line hanging out on, you know, the top point of Gibraltar point A and getting for these free shots. Almost rarely does LFZ ever get caught in that situation. They constantly have somebody checking for a sniper. I'm a huge Michelle fan, you know, as a diva player myself, but I've never seen Michelle not be in position for something, constantly jumping, getting on widows, constantly having the matrix ready for something, enabling his DPS very well. So with LFZ, they don't have blinders on. They never let like the duration of a fight essentially throw away their concentration. And that just, again, shows how strong their fundamentals are. And I would think that would translate into any patch. And of course, as we've said, the 2 weeks are very helpful. But as a team, they never like their game sense is just really, really good. And I think that's why they can go this like one comp or very like subtle changes in terms of their compositions, because what they've already run is so strong that it has just a good matchup across the board over against whatever they're going to run into.
It certainly seems like they just. Oh, go on, carry on.
The one thing I was going to say, I don't think we've even mentioned this or emphasized it, but it's a full Korean roster, which I think is another.
Yeah.
Like,
That's helpful.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
So
good.
like, I just
I heard
everything.
Koreans are good at this game.
It's more the sort of playstyle is just seems cerebral. Like certainly mentioning stuff like double sniper, the way that they make that work. You sometimes see two snipers basically sitting next to each other, just potting shots from a distance, be like, "Hey, how's it going?" But they're splitting apart. They're working flanks. They know where each other is supposed to be, so they feel comfortable and they feel like a team that really has each other's back. And because of that, nobody looks like they're a weak chain or a weak link. And then again, nobody really looks like they're completely dominating a match, that they're an MVP, because everybody's pulling their weight, and that's what makes them so strong and so scary.
Now, I think Marvel is the only guy that I'm not familiar with. I don't think he was with them last season. Am I wrong there?
It was So What who was on that team.
Yes, it was So What
Yeah,
last
he's
season.
playing
He went to
tank.
Lucky Future.
I know
Yeah.
DM and Ursta, have this long history playing with Michelle in like Ardeon and Mighty OD.
Mhm.
IDK, I've been a big fan of for ages because he played with AF Blue and was fantastic. Really good Lucio player, very good Mercy player as well. And then Lucid, I think, has also played for AF Blue in the past. It was like picked up as one of their support players, the flex support, and did really well. So the most interesting people to me are Marvel and Yarg, because I know Yarg had a bit of potential previously. How do you rate these guys? Is everybody on this team really good, like Owl caliber, or are there like shaky points with these people? Are they not quite Owl caliber level? What's your feel of the individual level across the board?
I guess I'll go. I think so. Yarg was on Lucky Future this entire season, and then for playoffs, switched over to Lucky Future Zenith. So now, as if the duo of DM and Urster wasn't scary enough, you have Yarg, and Yarg is probably the biggest bright spot that was on Lucky Future. Just with his Hanzo play was, and he had to play a lot with So What, which helped. I think
his Farah play was really good.
Yeah,
really
Farah too. So Yarg was probably the best part of. Actually, not even probably. He was the best part of Lucky Future throughout their season. He tried his heart out to put him in his backpack and just carry them to that playoffs. It didn't end up working out, but I think we didn't see him today at all because I don't think they needed him. It was a 45-minute series. They didn't need to play him that much. I think he is definitely kind of one of those sleeper picks where they could bring him in to play something maybe that T1W or the rest of the people in grand finals haven't seen yet. So I think Yarg is definitely a very good player. I'm not sure if he's better than DM and Urster because DM and Urster have been so consistent for such a long time, but I think Yarg is definitely one of these players that can bring some surprise and shock factor to Lucky Future Zenith's roster.
What about Marvel as well then?
Yeah, Marvel's been, I would say, a pretty consistent main tank. Not a player that was like super stuck out to me. I think a lot of especially on Lucky Future Zenith, it's one of those situations where if you don't see anything negative, you don't really hear a lot from them. They kind of just do their job. And I think that very much goes for the team supports as well. Like you don't, they're very quiet, but you don't see them screw up a lot. So it's hard to be like, oh, are they really Overwatch League caliber? They very well could be, and it'd be hard to tell. It might be more noticeable on a team that might be slightly less good. I think Marvel's in the same situation. His main tank play is just very competent, very solid, but is not like a player that you is like highlight or star player-ish. So at least and that's just you might disagree, but not a player that I'd be like, oh yeah, definitely Overwatch League material, but he could be. It's just it's like one of those things where there's so much it's a very bright team. Sometimes it's hard to necessarily designate or distinguish the sources of light on them,
Yeah,
exactly. Like you don't know how he's going to run in. If you just took him out of a team and planted him somewhere else, especially in another Korean team, you just have zero idea how that would work out. We, of course, don't really know his personality. It's not as if we've been able to sit and have a drink with him at any point.
But it's calling him. Don't you have his number? You should know. He's cocky.
I'll call him up. I'll call him up after this.
Yeah.
Just on the hot dial. And it's really, I think that's just applicable to a lot of the players in that lineup. Is just you could take them and put them on one of the free full Korean rosters on Overwatch League, but it's hard to say how much of an impact they're going to have because you don't really know who really behind the scenes is the engine for the squad. It could be Marvel, it could be Michelle, it could be just that sort of basic four of the 2 tanks, 2 supports that could be really holding that team together. But I think when you see a team like that, when they start to lose a lot, that's where the cracks start to show. And I think Morty a long time ago was like, when those teams that are so used to winning start to lose, that's where they're just not used to it, right? So this is a team that honestly hasn't had a lot of things to scare them, haven't had a lot of problems to deal with. So right now they've just looked so consistent, which makes it really difficult to talk about their pitfalls because really they haven't been pushed in any form of way so far. And even with this meta, it's like, oh, we're just going to play what we played last time.
Yeah, yeah.
We don't worry about that at all.
Where do you think they would place in either other Contenders regions or Overwatch League then? This seems to be the clear-cut best team in Contenders China. They've been performing at this level for quite a long time. They were winning the Pacific Championship, albeit with a slightly different roster, but the core was the same. Where do you rank this team? If you think about if they were plugged in instead of the Shanghai Dragons, for example, during this season of Overwatch League, or were picked up as an expansion team, what kind of level of success would you expect from them?
1-39. No, I don't. I think it's so
take.
difficult to say because you could maybe see like Guangzhou just picking up this team entirely, but like if you were moving like because they're a full Korean roster, if you moved them to Korean Contenders, I think they would make playoffs, but it'd be really patchy of whether they'd go further than that. They look good, but I think when you have teams pulling out different strategies, making Lucky Future sweat on what their composition was going to be, for example. You know, like really looking at the tape. Okay, they like to run this. Let's run this comp instead. I'd like to see that a little bit more. And because of that, it's really hard to say. I'd say they wouldn't get relegated from Contenders for Korea, but I don't think they would strive to like semifinals or finals themselves. They'd be like the bar. They'd be like, I guess, the Gladiators for the Overwatch League, but in Korean Contenders.
Yeah, I could see them playing the role that HTP plays now in their region, which is a gatekeeper team. Like, if you can beat them, you're a contender. But like, if you can't, then you have to improve because that's the team to beat. Like, I could see them being like in Korean Contenders, a mid-level team. And I also it's also hard because I mean I don't think that they've had too much like late stage like playoff experience except like last season. And like they don't like anything higher than this level. They haven't been truly tested. They haven't been really tested in this region.
Yeah, yeah.
I think once they got a test, they'd be able to hold on pretty strong, but I don't know if they would excel. But that would be really interesting. I'd love to see like maybe a big like mix of these teams like kind of going at it. I will say if they were in like Overwatch League, they'd be like because there are like 12 teams in it right now. They're like 9th or 10th at least. Like I think they wouldn't be too bad. Overwatch League's hard to peg something there, but they'd be better than I could put them at least like 5-35. That'd be pretty solid.
They'd beat Shanghai. I
think they'd beat Mayhem too. Like
I think they could beat Mayhem
a strong
and
unit
and
as a team.
Yeah.
Season 1 through 3 Dallas Fuel, they'd probably beat too. I think just the playoffs is a good spot in Korean Contenders, I think, for them. And I think if they were in Overwatch League, they definitely have a much better time than Shanghai, because Shanghai towards the end had a lot of communications issues, whereas Lucky Future Zenith, it's not a lot about communication for them. It's like Ryan mentioned, they're able to adapt to certain metas, and like if you're able to make them sweat a little bit, that's the difference. But I think fundamentally, as Rapture mentioned, they're very good and they have a lot of team cohesiveness. So I think they would do okay. They would be middle of the pack, maybe lower half of the teams in Overwatch League.
They also have a really good name, which is helpful.
Yeah. And it'd be kind of like Houston, I feel, that they'd start off really strong, but once teams worked out what areas that they could shut down, that the form would just drop and just gradually sort of fade out, and there'd be sort of unknowns to an extent. And maybe that's the areas where once Lucky Future Zenith have problems, they want to bring in new players. If they were going to be like Guangzhou's team, what kind of players would they want to be? Chinese? How are they going to approach that? Like as a basic squad to bring in, if you were doing it in the fashion of like, let's say the London Spitfire approach of just taking 2 teams and trying to mesh them together, I can certainly see Lucky Future Zenith being used as that. But what players would make it to the first team squad over like talent like Eileen or Shy or those certain characters that really made you look at them and focus on them remains to be seen. I feel like it's so difficult to measure this team because they just are so comfortable. We could just sort of keep going on about that until the cows come home. But like, I just want to see them struggle a little bit. And I think I hope I'm not casting it because I'm going to see them like drop a map and I'll be like, oh, this is great. Like, I love this. I just love to see them, what they do under a little bit more pressure.
Yeah. I agree with that completely. All right, let's move on to the team then that they're going to face in the playoffs and discuss what makes T1W good. Because I had this team as the third best last season. I think that they were playing pretty well, and I've heard a lot of I've heard a lot of good stuff about Crystal as well. I think Crystal's a driving force on this team, right?
Yeah, he's China World Cup DPS. I think him and K Hart from Team CC are the two DPS for the Chinese World Cup team. And I mentioned it before. The one time where Lucky Future Zenith actually looked mortal was against Crystal on Widowmaker specifically, and on Hanzo, where he just took over the game almost by himself. But today specifically, I think Moline Ren has also shown that he's a very good player. He was kind of Pharah one trick, I want to say, is Pharah is what he would play a bunch of the times. He plays he plays Hanzo as well, but he played a lot of Pharah. Even on King's Row Defense Point A, we don't see that very often playing Pharah there. So he's just very comfortable on that hero, and his hero pool is very, very deep. I think also today Silver 3 probably had the best game of his season career. Maybe he completely decimated whoever was the other tank for Team CC. Played very good on Reinhardt and Winston.
GQ Ren.
Yeah, GQ Ren. So did a very good job there. So they definitely have the momentum going into this next fight. And I think it is going to come down a lot to DM and Erster versus Crystal and Moline Ren to see which one comes out on top. If Moline Ren is going to be able to play the Sombra to the same level he played today, and if Crystal can also, do his thing on either the hit scan role.
There's a very unique trend coming out of T1W as well, looking back at it. They played a lot of tanks, like triple tanks, one DPS. Or like triples, it basically just ran the one DPS a lot of the time. So it was a lot for like Moline Ren to concentrate on, but really had that impact. Crystal was predominantly on Zarya. They run Brigitte now and again. It was just these variations of either triple support in a very like Brigitte Goats compy kind of fashion, or triple tanks. And again, it's one of those things where I think it's very similar to Flag Gaming 2 when they ran it against LGD. Very tank focused, maybe a little bit like, we're not really sure it's going to work, so we're going to go for like a safe option that can't really go too wrong. And Team CC were, again, like Moss 7 Club, everybody could be very patchy, very inconsistent. So I think once they lost that first map, it was pretty much game over from them. They seemed to sort of roll over a little bit. And I think that's been Team CC's season so far. So T1W, I think, are going to have to concentrate a lot on these next 2 weeks to be prepared for the semi-final, because I think if they go in with what they went into this game, Lucky Future Zenith are just going to eat them alive.
Yeah, you guys pretty much took the words out of my mouth with that one. And T1W has already had they had to play LFZ and LGE already. Those are their two losses in the season. So they have the best losses you could possibly have. Of course, going back earlier, they're the only team to take a map off of LFZ. So just schedule-wise, I think T1W has proven themselves. They even actually have the second best map differential. They have a better one than LGE. So I think they've proven themselves schedule-wise that they have like the endurance to go the distance. But the problem is that they've already kind of played their hand against LFZ. They kind of put everything out there in that set, and it was more of like a war of attrition by the end of the set. Like LFZ was kind of running circles around them. They kind of put like everything into those first couple maps and only got one map win out of it. In that regard, I don't know if T1W has the stamina to hold up against LFZ in a best of 5 in playoffs. Again, going back to the fundamentals thing, that means you can stay in the fight for a lot longer. You're less likely to break down over time over these maps. I think T1W might try to eventually flex to different compositions to try and get leverage over LFZ. And more often than not, especially in this region, that doesn't work. So I don't want it to be a stomp, but LFZ right now is very, very well positioned to just kind of roll over T1W. And in their previous, like against who they just played, HTP, or not HTP, their previous Team CC. Team CC wasn't much of a test for them, so we didn't see a different T1W in the playoffs so far. I would like to hope that they're hiding something for LFZ, which would be really hype. But again, something like that only works once, and you have multiple maps to win against essentially the best team in the region. You can't really get away with cheese as long as possible, or for very long. So I hope that they take these next 2 weeks to really get the fundamentals down, be able to keep up with just the peeling ability of LFC, the fact that LFC finds themselves in 2v1 situations very, very, very often. Going back to Michelle, I can't really count how many times Michelle would peel at the right times and help out in a 2v1 or 1v1 DPS situation and help clean up the kill and then get back in and force a 6v5 situation or a 5v4 situation. Things like that stack up over time that LFC is really good at that I haven't seen yet from T1W. When they're playing well, they're kind of just playing vanilla Overwatch. They're kind of just playing good. But it's again one of those situations where this region has a pretty large skill disparity once you kind of get deeper into the groups. So the tests are very few and far between. That being said, I do think that it'll be a entertaining game. I'm looking more forward to LGE versus Flag Gaming because coming into that set, both of those teams put on a very solid performance and like show-stopping things. This right now is more of like a redo for T1W. Like, all right, we got another chance at this. What can we bring to the table that we didn't bring last time? And I'm not entirely sure what else T1W has left in the tank.
All right, let's flip over to the other side of the bracket then, since you mentioned it.
Yes.
LGD against Flag Gaming. So what is going to define this game? I think T1W, we've already been through that. They need to have big performances out of the DPS. They need to have a bit of luck on their side as well. But for LGD against Flag Gaming, what's going to be the defining features of this match, do you think?
How LGD rolls against like Goats come, because Flag Gaming brought that out on a lot of occasions and won that. Like Moss 7 Club just either tried to run mirror comp it, or they actually showed a really good composition on Gibraltar on their defense by running stuff like Sombra and just dissecting it and pulling it apart every time it went in. You kind of think, why didn't you do that sooner to an extent? But they were too old. The deciding map was going to be on Ilios. Both teams just ran Goats comp all of the time. And I think there are areas where I think if LGD are trying to run a strategy, they go into Goats comp, Flag Game and just run them over, and LGD have to try and mirror comp it because they're not sure what else. LGD are going to be on the back foot. I think they'd win out against Flag Gaming, but they're going to come through with like a black eye or something. I think it's going to be really close, and Flag Gaming have done well to get this far. They're going to take as much ground as they possibly can. So it's going to be a scrappy sort of thing. I think, look, if you just send it versus T1W, it's going to be nice and clean. This one could go either way, but I'd be surprised if it's like a 3-0 to evil side, I guess.
Lately, Flag Gaming also, speaking of their compositions, they ran Goats comp a lot, and like Ryan mentioned, they ran it very well, but they've also been running more of a triple DPS style, which we've been seeing more and more in this Chinese region lately. Coldest is their off support and has been flexing over to the Tracers, so they put DMO, Jason, and Coldest on the DPS and, plays that Tracer role, and it works out very well. Moss 7 Club was kind of this team that, they played a lot of weird stuff, and then they got, countered by basically what they used to do is Flag Gaming come out with real DPS. So I think they definitely have more than just Goats comp in their repertoire. They do have this triple DPS that works pretty well. Coldest is just a beast on Tracer, beast on Zen, beast on Tracer. I think he's been called like the Badosian of their region, right? Just a very good player on anything he does. So I think that that's probably another thing that they can bring to the table as well. And, I can't stress this enough, how much of an impact it seems like Over has made to this team. I mean, before it was Melons. Melons was playing a little bit more passive on the main tank, and now you have Over, who is just getting in there, very aggressive, very, trying to make space for his DPS. So I think Flag Gaming has completely shocked me with how they've changed their style of play and how they look today versus Moss 7 Club, who I thought was going to win. So I think definitely Flag Gaming does have the pieces to take down LGD. I think it'll go 5 games, and I think it's going to be probably LGD squeaking it out just barely.
A little bit. I do want to highlight DMO as well. Like, you don't really get to highlight Brigitte play an awful lot, but there were a lot of cases where the right timed shield bash would shut down an enemy team's Earth Shatter, set up their own. It's very easy to just sort of sit and look at Goats comp as this, like, it is a bit of a cheese strategy because it's like by definition fairly easy to run and has high impact when it works. But ultimately, there was a lot of like nice calls to shut down certain targets to focus them. Coldest as well was pulling out the Tracer, and they're like the sort of flex support player. So it's easy to just go, oh yeah, they're going to run Goats comp, but it's just because they look so good on it. It's not so much that they're just factoring in cheese. It's like, this is a strategy that seems to fit them really well. Jason on Zarya looked really good. It was kind of like almost to an extent how Dallas Fuel ran Mickey on Brigitte. Like, it's just a strategy that suited the team. Like every play was playing on a desired hero, and because of that, they looked like they were having a good time with it. But then you saw stuff like Moss 7 Club picking Gibraltar to play on because obviously it's not GOAT's like nice to them at all because it's so a lot of high verticality. Yeah, that they can be caught out by map picks if they go like if they win a map because the loser decides what map they're going to play on next. So it could go either way, I feel. But Flag Gaming do have time to practice different strategies if they see fit.
Yeah, I didn't catch as much Flag Gaming as I'd want to, but and coming off of what I was saying about T1W, how they haven't seen a different T1W yet. We did see a different LGD against LGE. I think LGD really came out of the gate on fire. They won on Assault, which they had a 20% win rate going into that set with. So like that was a team that I was actually very surprised how well they did. So that's why I'm very happy that like, okay, we got Flag Gaming record wise or group wise upset Moss 7 Club, LGD upsetting LGE, and also like from what we saw, proving themselves to be a different team going into the set. I think that's going to make for a really exciting match because both of these teams are kind of on a high coming into this. With their fates not necessarily like written in stone just yet. Neither of those matches really could have been predicted very well. And of course, we're in groups where like you play one team once or each team once. It's hard to look at stats and be like, well, that's how it's going to go every time. Even looking at the fact that they had a 20% win rate on Assault may not necessarily, spell out everything, right? But to that, I still think like LGE or LGD has kind of surpassed maybe expectations a little bit here. And so in that case, I think Flag Gaming has done that as well. To me, it makes this part of the bracket much more exciting.
Kind of reminds me of England in the actual World Cup in their semi-final. Like it was the easiest route because you're avoiding teams like Lucky Future Zenith, but it's still not easy by definition. So LGD Gaming,
I don't know what World Cup you're on about.
It happened for me. I'm French.
Oh, fair enough.
Oh.
Fair. You're French. Yeah, you get to claim that. Sure. What
it's
part
kinda-
of you is French?
I didn't know he was French.
My 50%.
Okay, so you only get to claim 50% of the win, which is a
I'll
loss.
take 50% of the win.
Which is that's not passing. 50%
No,
is not
that's
passing.
not passing.
Not passing.
I was there with Semler as well while he was gloating to me. He doesn't even know the rules of football. He just loves to gloat about it.
Well, because he's part French.
Yeah, exactly. He's half French as well.
He's uber French.
Yeah. Okay, so two of the guys that I have enjoyed watching on LGD Gaming, and as far as I know, underage and are not going to be eligible for playing the Overwatch League even next season, are Eileen and Shy. Am I right with that? That they're still underage for next season? I think so.
16.
Yeah, I think they're really young, right? And Shy used to be I think the best flex support in the Chinese region, and then moved over to play DPS. So how are these two guys doing? Are they still going to be like hot pickups when they actually do come of age? Do you think?
I think for sure. I think any team would be looking to have them in the roster, even if they're not going to be on the first team. I think it's also worth highlighting that Shy is going to be on like the team for the World Cup too. So, like, I would have liked to have seen Eileen on there. I like Eileen because he seems that even when LGD are doing poorly, he still shows up a bit more. Like Shy has a habit of just disappearing completely. But I do wonder if, say, the whole group stages does 5 maps, if it was played on this patch now, whether LGD would win all of their games. Like it feels like, certainly looking back on the older patch and how they played, they lost to teams like Team CC, and again they've been patching themselves, so like they've been one of the better teams in Group B, but let's be frank, Group B didn't have a lot of good teams. And LGD last season, much like Lucky Future Zenith this season, won all their games, only dropped 1 map, and then they came into this season, lost the first game, narrowly won the second 3-2. So this is a team, whether they've changed up stuff or not, looked from the get-go a lot shakier in a group that should have been easy for them by definition. For Shy, I think that falls on him a little bit more. Eileen just seems to be able to pick up stuff like Doomfist and do some crazy tech that I'd never seen before personally. But whether that's enough when you have the full team, it's hard to say who it falls on, when I think their tank lineup has been really good, their supports have been really strong. You can't really look at LGD and go, what is the problem? But every time I try, I kind of look at Shy a little bit more than everybody else.
It's kind of, Shy has this insane clutch factor that kind of reminds me of Striker from Boston Uprising, when he would, when they were really good and they had that time where, the fight looks lost and then Striker comes back, gets like a huge 3K on Tracer. Really good job from him there. And I really like just how he doesn't seem to have this ability to like Rapture mentioned, he he doesn't have this tunnel vision. Like he gets in the back line and he'll, when he gets on the tracer as well, he plays very well. I like the way that he just understands, his target selection. Like he'll go like boom, boom, boom. It's just like 3K really quickly. I really like the way Shy has this kind of clutch ability, and it happens. It's not like something that happens like once in a while. It's usually whenever the map is at the end, you can always rely on Shy to kind of be there for you. Even if Eileen isn't playing at his best, which at times he's been a bit patchy, like Ryan mentioned, you have Shy to always rely on. And I think having that very reliable DPS, second DPS, is something that I think every team should strive for.
I think just quickly looking over like their results over like the stage, like says a lot. First game they lost 1-3, then 1-3-2, then 1-3-1, then 1-3-2, then lost 2-3, then 1-3-1. They haven't had any 4-0s over a group that has a lot of weak talent in there. Like even against teams that have lost all of their matches, like Future Group, they still dropped a map against. So it's kind of like, if you really want to be compared and be in the final with Lucky Future Zenith, you need to have a bit more of a way to just completely dominate those matches. But dropping the map against everybody and taking, losing 2-3 to Team CC and barely beating Lucky Future, it's kind of like, it's good. You look at the talent, you should be doing better.
That's interesting. I think this is twofold for LGD. First, at least in terms of Eileen and Sky seems like with Sky, if the team is not playing very not Sky. My window's open. That's what it is. It's with Shy. When the team is not playing very well, Shy kind of plays down to their level, I think, very often. Whereas Eileen seems more independent of the rest of the team. So I think maybe personally, I think Eileen's clutch factor is a little better. Second, I think LGD's weakest line is their support line. The decision making on their supports can put them in pretty rough situations. You'll see Only Wish go for questionable reses often. When they make right decisions, their actual skill is fine. It's just that often the support line is like out of position or making some kind of weird choice that gets them like killed early in the fight, and all of a sudden LGD has to reset, or they've burned an ultimate and my Mercy's down and now we've lost everything and that Graviton's gone. It's things like that I think will kind of nip LGD in the butt a little bit over the course of maybe this next set. Also a good point, Ryan, bringing up, they haven't had a clean win over anybody. I think those things will stack up for them, and that'll mean the DPS line will have to pick up the slack even more so. I think that's why we'll probably rely on Sombra a lot going into these playoff sets, because very often to deal with a Sombra, you kind of need your own Sombra. So in that way, LGD can force other teams to kind of play at their own pace. I think that's how LGD will probably get over flag gaming, is if they can just, all right, we're gonna go Sombra, or this individual pick, probably Sombra, and force you to change up your own game, play our game, and hopefully we beat you that way. And that's what they did to LGE with the Sombra pick from Eileen. I think they're going to try and continue to do that, and that'll be probably where they find their success, as long as their supports make better decisions and they can rely on their DPS and they have that like game setting pick, setting the pace themselves. I think that's where LGD kind of find their success, but it is definitely multifaceted for them. Like, this is what I think makes this very exciting, is that these teams have been proven. They've shown weaknesses, they've shown strengths, and now you got to kind of bring it all together because the other team wants it just as bad as you do.
The way that I think a lot about Chinese contenders as well is that there are players with a lot of individual talent, but it does seem to be very scrappy, very individual focused, very much on the DPS. And I wonder how much of this comes down to coaching infrastructure. And I thought this about the Shanghai Dragons as well, is that a lot of the problems that they seem to have were an inability to understand how to play Overwatch at the highest level. Are there teams that you look at them and you think they play very intelligent Overwatch, and you know that they have like big coaching staff behind them? Are there people that you think would be... It's difficult, right, when you don't speak the language and you're also not actually on site with them. But have you been able to have any insight, or are you able to speculate a little bit about any of these teams having decent coaching staff behind them?
It's hard to surmise. I mean, LFC probably.
They have coach.
I would assume. After that, I still think, because like the skill disparity kind of shows that there's a lot of drop off in this region. So if it is any team, it's probably only like one or two of them at the top that has that.
We're not.
You'd assume that LGD would, being that they are like a big organization, certainly in the Chinese region. But it's hard to say. It's very difficult to find information on the players playing themselves if you're looking at resources like Wikipedia. That might have a lot of background staff trying to work on stuff, but it's hard to say. And it is really difficult because certainly watching a few of the other ones, like talking with like trade and dares for like EU, and they're like, oh yeah, we spoke to this player about this, and they said this, is like, we don't really have that luxury. I'm sure like
Do you
it'd
not
be
speak
great. I
Chinese?
remember, not at all, not at
No.
all.
Get on Duolingo.
You should see you should see our pronunciations when we can. It's just like,
well, first week, it's gotten better. First week
it's gotten better.
Was a big yikes. Yeah.
But like I think it's nice that this is an opportunity that we have. I think it was Panda, like another caster, that said he got the opportunity to sort of see Dyer at the Overwatch League finals and told him that, you know, we were casting like his region and stuff. Apparently he's like eyes lit up and he seemed really happy with that prospect. So I think it is like really easy to look at Chinese contenders and go, it's the worst out of all of them. And I think when you look at the teams that have like lost all of their games,
I don't know, mate.
like,
That's
yeah,
not the
fair
regions.
enough.
You said that so
It's easy to sort of like when you like see Shanghai Dragons to make that connotation with, oh, the worst team has like its own region, and whether Guangzhou is going to follow in that suit. Like there's talent there. I would just hate it if the other Chinese team was just picked up to be a full Korean roster. It wouldn't surprise me, but I'd be really disappointed.
Yes, I think that's a trick missed. I think the region in terms of just like marketing and stuff is so big that you cannot afford both of your Chinese teams to be full Korean rosters.
Exactly.
I think
Do you
that would be a
remember
disaster.
When people were making their predictions before the league started, I remember Alaka saying that Shanghai would be third. Like that's way back when, and it's like obviously you can sort of sit and laugh at it now, but like that's the strength and depth that the region does have.
I think people were on the miraculous youngster hype train at that point as well, because they actually did look really good. They looked like maybe even a top 5 team in the world. So
I remember
the talent was kind of there.
Scribe, one of our analysts, says that there was a point where I thought Miraculous Youngster was the best team in Overwatch.
Okay,
and then
Scribe needs his head looking at, but they did look pretty good at some
or
point.
top 3. He said top three. But
I think you say like whether they have coaches, whether they have backroom staff. I think that is going to be like dividends. It seemed that way for Shanghai too. Just a lot of like behind the scenes issues that they had. Obviously, was made worse when they brought Korean players with Chinese.
Yeah, also playing in 3 different languages.
Yeah, exactly. So like,
actually 4.
I think
what I love about it is they spoke Korean, Mandarin, and English. The only player that could speak all 3 was altering, and so they actually started speaking in like code words that were none of those languages. So they were speaking 4 languages, one of them being invented, and none of them spoke all of them. Yeah, it
Shanghai
was
language.
just madness. Although there are actually some mixed teams in Chinese contenders, right? That have picked up like 1 Korean player or something.
Yeah, well, I mean,
Lucky Future
was one of them. Yeah, I think they took the players back though. Like So What and Yag.
Lucky Future and Future Group are the 2 that are mixed that had Korean players on them. Future Group didn't do that good.
Both got relegated, I think. So
yeah.
The
only team that I've ever seen like have anything close to coaching or just like at least like VOD review was Moss 7 Club. Just by the way that they played the game, like we always mention this. I think it's probably one of the best moments of the season is when they're running. They ran Bastion on Volskaya A, and against a team that was running Goats, I think it was Lucky Future, ran Goats into them. So they just pulled them all the way back to the Mega, and then there's just a surprise Bastion sitting there, and they just mow the enemy team down. And a lot of what Moss 7 Club did throughout the season was very niche, but it felt like it had some sort of plan behind it and some sort of this is going to work against. We have this plan to, if we're going to be running solo Roadhog tank, we're going to try and play a pick composition, and then we're going to play triple DPS around that. Like what they did felt very coached and felt very, I don't know if that's them or if that's the players, but that's the closest thing besides Lucky Future Zenith in general who I've seen who are just a well-oiled machine.
Prepared,
completely.
yeah. It just felt like there was a little bit like there was some like plat play. So like play compositions of you have the Genji, you wait till his Dragon Blade, you go in. It's that kind of like mentality, and there were a lot of full holds on some like maps too. Even in like the playoffs, there were just teams that never could take a third on like the first point of Volskaya or Temple Benevis.
That's Team CC.
T1W. They didn't get a single round on Oasis. They didn't finish Volskaya. They didn't finish Eichenwald.
Team
CC, they're the only academy team. You would think that they would have some organization behind them. But then you look at the organization behind them.
They had an interesting season.
They
is
were
what I'll
weird
call
because
it.
like Team CC like beat teams you
we
wouldn't.
thought they were going to be the
And then they
best
lost
team in our
to
story
teams
meeting.
that they shouldn't have lost to. Like they were the reverse HTP. They were the anti-gatekeeper. If you lost to them, you might be really good. But if they beat you, like you're like, or you beat them, they're like, oh man, are we trash? Like I don't know.
I called them Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde of Overwatch Contenders.
You wanted that to get over so bad.
I did because
you want it, and
they basically don't know what they want to do half the time. When they play, when you lose to Lucky Future, which is probably a big no-no, and lost very convincingly too. Like that's not a good win. Legend Young Beyond also is not a good loss to have on your record. But then they come out and they beat LGD in a 5-game set. It was just a very inconsistent team. I don't know what exactly happened. It just looked very, very weird.
When people look at the Team CC roster, it'll be the tank line that they're most familiar with, I think, unless they've been following Chinese contenders for a while, because Late Young was regarded as easily the best flex tank in the region prior to the Overwatch League, and Jikarin as well was renowned for his Reinhardt play, particularly when he was playing at the top level. How have these guys been over the course of the season? Should they still garner that kind of respect?
It's sort of you'd be looking at it like Shanghai
Late Young
Dragons.
maybe.
They just
like
say
Late
more.
Young, maybe.
You just sort of like Late Young is again playing for the Chinese team in the Overwatch League. I think, the Overwatch World Cup. Sorry, that you can sort of have a better gauge of when he goes into those sort of games and how he plays with a different team. He could absolutely pop off. I think he has been a shining star. He wouldn't be in that lineup if he wasn't. But Team CC, every time I look at them, you just kind of go, again,
what could have been?
Are in a group. Yeah, exactly. You're in a group where you have fairly inconsistent teams that you can really depend on. Like looking through their lineup again, have they got a similar story with how they've lost stuff? No, they lost 3-0 convincingly to T1W, obviously the playoffs. And they won 4-0 against Hero Takita and Panther. So again, it doesn't really make much sense. Like obviously there's something going on there that doesn't work. And you'd assume that there was the infrastructure there that just teams don't have, because they are an academy team. But it doesn't feel like that at all, certainly in comparison to other regions like British Hurricane or a lot of the NA like academy teams, which seem so far ahead of the other ones. Team CC should be better and they're not. And it's really confusing as to why, because they have the talent, they have the resources behind them.
I mean,
I
think British Hurricane are also going through a bit of a mare at the moment as well.
Yeah.
They at least Team CC didn't get put to trials.
That's true. I still have faith in my boys, though. All right. We've mentioned the Team China quite a lot, actually. And what I like about the Chinese region is that there are a lot of Chinese players there. And I think that that's an important thing to focus on when we're thinking about the Overwatch League as well. Because I think it would be a poor decision, and we talked about this a little bit before, to fill both of the Chinese teams with non-Chinese players. It just seems like a bit of... it seems like you're abandoning the region too early. It's only been one season, man. They've still got talent there. So what do you think about Team China? If you were going to make a super team, and you said at the beginning of this podcast, you could make a super team out of the top 3 teams, and you think it would do reasonably well. So is this the super team that you would have picked? What do you agree with and what don't you agree with on Team China this year?
Gushu is main tank 100%. Gushui, sorry. He again, he kind of reminds me of So What in that style. So What was rumored to be sort of picked up by Dallas Field, but it never actually happened. I could see Gushui being in that position too. Like he just plays really well as a Western tank. I think having somebody like Young behind him, there must be a reason why he's in that lineup. I'd love to see the Chinese team do really well in their qualifiers, because I think it would give you a glimpse of what they're capable of. We didn't see it last year because of all of the visa issues, but the Chinese team back then with Eileen, Leave, Yao Yao that was replaced a lot, but you got like Undead, Shy, and Five Kingdom weren't there. So I would look at Gushui certainly as a main tank. It's the supports that would worry me. Because I think you'd have Eileen, you'd have Shy, but I think you'd have other DPS in there to mix it up in different areas where, you could have Shy played in certain positions, but maybe have a different Widowmaker player or have somebody that was a bit more consistent, a bit more of a shot caller. But I think 100% it would be Gushui or Gushui. I've pronounced his name like 3 different times as I've said it, but
I was saying Guzia week
he'd been
one.
first.
What
He'd
about
be the first name on my list.
okay? What about Late Young then, partnered alongside him? I think this guy's got like tenure. He's proven himself in the past and stuff like that. He's got like a reputation behind him. I think that's probably played into it a little bit, even though his team hasn't had the most success. But if you were going to pick somebody purely on the success of this season of Contenders, and obviously it would have to be Chinese. You can't pick Michelle Ramsey.
Damn.
So who would you have gone for?
We already took my answer, so
Okay, fair enough.
You're gonna have to come back to me.
Is there a name that even comes into your mind, or is it really a toss-up?
Is it for off tank or just in general?
Yeah, for off tank, yeah.
I would, because I honestly think I'm
Ink
happy.
maybe. Ink
think
like
I'm happy
Yi Shin's
maybe.
been fairly consistent. Like
Yeah.
he hasn't been a problem for Moss Club 7 at all.
No. I don't like how Ink has HTP in front of his name because then we say Pink a lot. So
Yeah, we get
so he gets knocked
screwed
down
over
for me.
that. But he won't
yeah.
have it at Chinese
I think Unhappy would be a good flex tank. I think similarly, a pretty kind of flies under the radar, but a very, very consistent Zarya. My only worry is I don't know if the hero pool is super deep for Unhappy, but I would be like if you were to throw him on a team, I would be very confident with him playing that position. Obviously, I would pick
Which
Michelle.
team does Unhappy play for again?
T1W.
Yeah,
Right, yeah.
So that'd be my pick if I couldn't go with Michelle. Yeah,
You can't because it's Team China.
Yeah, I know, but if
Okay, in some miracle world where he has dual citizenship.
when the two countries pair up in the World Cup.
Okay,
then
so
we'll have
it's
that super team.
yeah, it seems like the tank line is reasonable though. So what about the DPS? Because for me, these seem like valid picks for DPS. Although I'm a little surprised that Eileen isn't in there. But you can only have 7 players on your roster. So is it like a crying shame that Eileen isn't in this roster? Leave, I remember being incredibly good. Crystal, I've heard a lot about. Shy, very flexible guy. Is this what do you think about this lineup of DPS?
I think it really is kind of a shame that Eileen and Shy can't play together on the World Cup roster, especially because Eileen and Shy have been probably one of the top 2, maybe top 3 DPS duos in the region so far.
Especially the playoffs, they look so good in the playoffs.
They look, and it's weird because K-Heart and Crystal kind of have the same type of hero pool, right? They play the hit scan, they play the Widow, they play all of these things. And K-Heart, I've said this before throughout this entire season.
Is K-Heart actually on the team? Is he in the final 7? Because I'm looking at Over.GG at the moment, and I don't think he is. Unless this source is wrong. But it's got Crystal, Shy, and Leave as the final 7.
Shy and Leave, okay.
I don't know. I could be wrong. I'm just going off Over.GG.
Yeah, I'm going off Over.GG. I have guess something else different, but I guess still I would probably, I mean, disregarding what I said about K-Heart, Crystal so far is pretty streaky, which is kind of the MO of a lot of the Widows in China. But Crystal is is much more consistent than I thought than K-Heart was at all throughout the season. I think Crystal is very reliable to always have this kind of option where, even if you're on Widow, he'll take the Widow duels 1v1 no matter what is happening. He's usually very consistent, usually wins his Widow battle. Like today, he completely crushed K-Heart. It was not even close. So I think having Crystal there is a good idea. I really, really want to see Shy and Eileen. And I think just specifically because they play together on they have, 6 weeks of playing together right now on this roster. So I think having that cohesion as a DPS duo, I think would help them a lot. Not to say that Leave and, K-Heart aren't going to be good with Shy, but I think having that, that connection, right? That connection that can only be built through time and trust between Eileen and Shy. I think having that would have been very good for them. And I'm kind of sad I'm not going to be seeing Eileen in the final 7.
I think you were gonna if you're picking an Overwatch League team into 12. I think if you were gonna have a Chinese roster, you'd just take all 6 of LGD, and then probably bring in
France with Rogue.
Yeah, I guess, and then just sort of taking parts of other teams. Like I was thinking of Kami from Lingen would be a really.
Wooly Gao would be a good pick from HTP.
Mm-hmm. But Mulan Ran is coming into his own, I think, as well. Who was
both really good projectile players.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that you've got Eileen for that. I don't think that's ever been a concern. Shy raises red flags for me. The support line is a really sort of who knows one, but that was the case for Shanghai too, where it's why would his players pick specifically?
All right, let's go on to the support line then, because Sky got picked up by the Shanghai Dragons
Mhm.
and really
Mhm.
failed to perform, actually. He was a previous player, he used to be known as Yufan Jun on the Miraculous Youngster, and his Ana was really good. But he only really played Ana. They had this like set style where they played Ryan Zarya Ana, and he didn't play much Zenyatta. His Zenyatta was pretty poor whenever it came out in the Overwatch League, poor position. Now, you've always got to caveat everything that happened with Shanghai Dragons. Like, this team was a fucking mess. Like, nobody looked good. Okay, so maybe it wasn't
0-40.
Sky's fault. Yeah, he can't communicate with his diva properly. You know, he's left high and dry. They don't have a good Mercy player. Okay, fair enough. All of those caveats aside, what do you think about the support duo that they've picked for Team China?
It's kind of
To be
Rapture-
honest,
yeah.
I was going to say from my casting, I don't think I've ever really highlighted some
We've
amazing
highlighted the
plays coming out
bad
of supports.
supports. That's the one.
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah,
bad.
that's what I'm saying either. Where like it's either earlier, like, either you're doing well and you don't really come up often, so you're not going to be criticized, or like something you do is bad and it's like obvious, it's explicit. You're doing your job well, you're not going to hear a lot about them. That's like so indicative of Chinese supports. Yeah, this is good luck, guys, with this one.
I think like with the way the meta's going, I think there are some shouts that you could bring in from the teams right now. I think Coldest we talked about on the off support flex role, right, where he can flex over to the Tracer, play the Zenyatta, play all these different things. I think he definitely deserves a shout. It's you can't see the future though. You didn't know that the meta was going to go this way, so it's a little bit difficult. But I think you can interchange a lot of the supports and not much is going to be different. I think China just as a region the tier is basically DPS, tank line, support, and supports are rather. If you're playing bad, it's definitely visible. But if you're playing to the capability of your hero, you're not going to notice it too much. So I think these two, I think Sky and Vital are pretty good picks. Vettel.
I think your Vettel is a solid pick. I will say that.
Yeah.
More because I got his name confused with the Pokemon. But that sticks out for me. Your Vettel was a very solid Mercy player. That's more than fine by me. I think just having a consistent Mercy goes a long way.
Definitely.
Yeah. So at that point, I think that's like one of those picks where it's like almost like a no brainer. Like, okay, like
not only Wish. That's like that's the only one we said no to.
Yeah. No, I think Only Wish gets a little bit of a bad rap because it kind of like goes bot a little bit sometimes. But I think that's probably why like Yvettel is a better pick because it doesn't have those moments very consistent. Like decision making is very on point. Doesn't go for like dumb reses. Isn't flying across the map in the middle of like a team fight. You'll see that. Like I saw that a bunch of times today. That's honestly I think gives them a little vote of confidence where like okay like the focus of this team is the DPS and the tank, but you can rely on Yvettel as a support player, and I think that'll be more than enough for them.
So then, overall, this seems like a reasonable team. How well are you expecting them to do? If this, let's put it this way, if this was a team in Chinese Contenders, do you think that they would be the best team apart from Lucky Future Zenith? Do you think this is an improvement over teams like LGD and T1W and Flag Gaming, I guess?
If they had a strong coach and analyst and all the resources available, then yes. If you're just leaving them to their own devices and expecting them to fix everything, then that's never going to happen. So it relies on a lot of stuff that feels almost out of control of the specific players themselves. That it's almost impossible to say. I think that they've got enough about them, especially when you have that sort of rock foundation of a team, and then DPS that can perform in those areas, that it would go well. But it's more, if it doesn't go well, how do they resolve that? Do they have people helping them sort of fix some of their mistakes to help think of compositions that they should and could be running? That's the question that is raised to me. Like, none of these players are, getting knocked out in playoffs because they're just flat out bad. It's just because you've got a new meta. Maybe some teams have been practicing a lot, been prepared for this position. And some teams have gone, well, we're just going to run goats. We're just going to run strategies that we ran before and hope for the best. But when that's gone well, that's fine. When it isn't, what do you do? Because that's your go-to. And when that doesn't work, what's your plan B? So it's so tricky to really sort of level it out, especially when you're in positions where you're saying who the supports could be. And you're going, well, a lot of them have made a good amount of mistakes. So it's more the best supports that we can get are the ones that make the least mistakes. Who is that again? I need to sort of double check and look through the teams and names. That it's difficult. But I feel that they just need, like Rui has been a name that's cropped up a lot, like just putting messages out there for fans for the Chinese team, having it translated. It's ended up on competitive Overwatch. That you kind of hope that somebody like him could really shine a light on the Chinese scene as a whole. He was sort of briefly involved in Shanghai, I believe, but not in
Rui
a
was. I think Rui was
negative sense.
Rui was the analyst for Miraculous Youngster that went over to coach Shanghai Dragons, right? And then had health issues, so wasn't able to continue. I think.
Yeah.
Am I thinking of the right guy?
And I think it was like, and I can't remember the name of the coach, and probably worth not saying, but there was obviously the boosting coach that sort of left, and I think then Rui came in. So I think in a lot of cases, if we talk about Shanghai real quick, it's like they had the right idea, they were doing the right things, but it was just too late. Even from like stage 2, whatever they did was just too late. They didn't prepare at all. And I think if we're looking at Guangzhou, they will have a big whiteboard and they will have Shanghai Dragons written and like, okay, how do we not fuck up that badly? And so there's going to be a lot of areas that I think they're going to put a lot of resources into. There isn't just strictly a team. They need to have preparation for bringing Chinese or Korean players over to LA and making sure that they're happy and comfortable with one another. Because if they aren't, then you're going to have a shit tip.
I think going back to your original question, Sideshow, to put it kind of in perspective, I think this team probably would make it to the finals against LFZ if give them a whole season to kind of get their stuff together, get through the playoffs. I think this team definitely does get to the finals against LFZ. Whether they beat LFZ completely, that's really hard to say, like Ryan is saying, but I think this team does have what it takes to get to that point. Whether they would be able to beat LFZ again, very difficult to tell. So I think, if Guangzhou, or sorry if I butchered the pronunciation, if Guangzhou comes out with this team, I'm not like blown away. I'm still curious as to why Shai is not playing with Eileen, but this is a perfectly good team that I think if you build a good foundation and not do what the Shanghai Dragons did, like Ryan is saying, I think you definitely have a team here that could, could end up growing and getting to a point where you can be proud of them and not be 0-40 like Shanghai was.
Well, I want to take Shanghai out of the equation because I think it's a given now that like anything's better than Shanghai. But I would confidently say that this would be a top 3 team in Chinese Contenders. In fact, I'd probably put them where T1W is now, and I think T1W and LGE was already a toss up for me. So I could see them being the second. Like right now, if we were looking at the bracket, I could see them being up against LGD in the semifinals right now, maybe instead of like Flag Gaming. The hero pool is very solid. The execution in terms of players, the K-Heart, Shy players that can enable themselves so they can play at the team level or get them back into the game. And I really think hero pool is something that you need very much so against LFC. So I would be very confident with this team being one of the best teams in Chinese Contenders currently. Even if they didn't have a coach at all, even if they didn't have like a Twitter, like I think they'd be okay. Beyond that, LFC is just such a very strong team, but I think that would be a team that would beat T1W, that would beat LGE, that would beat LGD. Might trade maps with them, maybe not convincing, but looking at this roster, for me personally, would be a top 3 team in current Chinese Contenders. So, and if they like switch, because there's obviously the support line too. If they could like possibly change that instead of just running like what the current like starting lineup for the roster would make them even stronger. So I would confidently say they would be a good team.
Yeah, not meta dependent either. I think they'd be strong over different composition styles, different maps. They'd just be a team that would be quite difficult to try and trip up. But it's hard to say whether they have the potential as a full squad to be pound for pound in comparison to LFC, because that's really what it comes down to. Can they pop off? Absolutely. Are they going to absolutely stack up with the support lineup, the tanks in general, and the DPS when they need to rely on them as a focused team, making sure they rotate ultimates, all of the principles behind playing Overwatch as a team game? That's where you have the question marks. The individual talent, sure.
I can see them making an upset at the World Cup, though. When you look at the group that they're in, Sweden sometimes underperform massively. I love Johnny, but he hasn't played main tank in a while. And then Denmark have got Denmark and Spain have both got a bit of upset potential themselves. Some decent players, but they don't really have like a full team of good, like top level talent.
I think
Thailand, occasionally they have some all right performances, but I wouldn't expect them to be there. Australia normally do pretty well. They normally overperform at the World Cup as well. But they could squeeze it out.
Yeah, I think they're favourites in the group. Like Sweden do look good. there's a lot of a lot of talent that you're obviously not going to have in your squad for Sweden because it's such a stacked country when it comes to individual talent. But China, I just feel like if you bring in those kind of players, then they will gel quite naturally. They don't need to worry about that coming up. There's 2 weeks off because you have the Korean, I believe. Yeah, the Korean
Korean is
qualifiers next week. Then you have the semifinals straight into the finals. So I'd like to see LFC be upset. I want to see what they do if they go like 1 or 2 maps down.
Yeah,
We
I
know
see
that that's possible.
competitive. We want to see competitive. Like we don't want to see LFG just completely smash through these playoffs like they're doing already.
Yeah, we had that in the final in season 1, but the issue is that like LGD from like I never watched really any of the matches. This was before Broadcast GG were like casting them because that was just for season 2. How much different they were because they come into this season, lose the first game, drop maps against everybody that they played with up until now, even in the playoffs.
Empirically, they looked a lot more dominant last season.
They seem worse than they did last time out. So if it's going to be the same, would you expect a similar sort of like both teams taking it right to the end, or would just LFC completely dominate because they haven't broken the sweat since season 1 Contenders? So I'd expect that would keep going.
Are there any players that we haven't mentioned that you think should have a spotlight on them in Chinese Contenders? If people are looking and they're trying to find players that have good up and coming talent or people that should be at least included in scouting for these expansion teams if they want to go a Chinese route. Is there anybody that we haven't mentioned that really should have that spotlight on them?
I really like Mask for Must 7 Club.
I was looking there too. I was like, they're a team that's has some really good pieces on their team.
For sure. I like Guda. Just the whole lineup of Moss 7 Club looked good, and like they looked. It sounds stupid. When they played Overwatch, it looked like they were having fun. Like they really relished in the idea of, oh, we're losing against this composition. Let's actually switch it up. And like their game against Flag Gaming was so good to like cast and watch because it was how Overwatch was meant to be played. And like they were looking at each other's lineups, pressing tab, keeping like one foot in the spawn door, ready to change to another hero, depending on what the other team were running at. They looked like they were comfortable running different strategies. That's nice to see. And because it's just a shame to see Moss 7 not really taking the initiative because this is a team that has pulled out some really crazy shit over the season. Then you go to a meta where so much more options are open with supports, with Sombra, with all this other stuff. You'd sort of expect that they would be the first team ever to pull out like competitive Symmetra, right? Like that would have been no surprise, but it looks somewhat tame from them in the playoffs. So it's a shame to see them go down to Flag Gaming, but Flag just looked like a completely different team. I just hope that Moss 7 next season can improve on that. And they do have the potential to kind of do what LGD Gaming are doing right now, for sure.
Yeah, Moss 7 was the only team that consistently brought out Wrecking Ball. This new hero that everyone was like,
Sure.
I wonder how
Hammond.
this hero's Hammond.
Why they
I
call
refuse
him
to call it
Wrecking
Wrecking
Ball?
We have to be
It's
called.
like-
We have to call it Wrecking Ball.
You don't have to do
Why
shit.
Why did they make it? Can we
Call him
why did
Hammy
they
the
make it
Hamster.
Hammy the
single
Hamster.
time.
Panda was arguing about
Contaro.
this, like, oh, what if we call Diva by her real name? Yeah, but Diva is short to say. Wrecking Ball is so many syllables. He has a short name. It doesn't.
I'm on your side. His name's Hammond.
So Moss 7 brought out the
Same
Hammy. Brought out Hammy the Hamster.
The ham and cheese.
They
Like,
brought out Hammy the Hamster. It worked okay. They're the only people who really had that. It did its job in doing a lot of disruption, but they didn't have the follow up on it. Vanessa is also someone who I think we should Vanessa is their off tank DPS main tank player. The flexibility that Vanessa has to play, they go from Orisa, then to Tracer, then to Pharah, and all playing it at a very consistent level as well. Having that type of flexibility, not only in your hero pool, but between roles, I think is also something really special. So that's definitely someone who you can have as, that utility player, I think.
for me, my pick is Jason, who is now on Flag Gaming. For anyone who followed Vici Gaming, Jason played with them for the in the Premier Series.
Very
And,
old school player.
Yes,
Mhm.
and I believe I think he's 17 now. So like that's a
The
player.
hell? Really? He must
Yeah,
have been
I-
like 14 when he started
Yeah,
playing.
he's 17.
I think if you look that up, I think he's
Yeah,
17.
he's 17.
Like
I
that. So,
fact
like,
checked.
Okay, cool. Sweet. I don't remember that. I think he played very well in Flag Gaming, played very well in Beach Gaming. Has experience for his age. I would personally expect a lot from Jason in the next like 2 years. I could see him playing at a higher level than he's playing in right now. I think Flag Gaming super lucked out getting him off Vici Gaming. And I think he'll be a pivotal point of pushing them through the playoffs and possibly taking it. So I would not be surprised to see him. Actually, I could see him playing in Overwatch League, actually. So I would not be surprised to see a lot more from Jason.
I think you could put him with Shine Eileen in like our fantasy team.
Yeah,
DPS. Like I think he'd fit in nicely. And like I think seeing how he and DMO's a bit more of like a sort of sleeper pick, mostly pretty much only played Brigitte
Widow, and we played a lot of Widow.
Yeah, sort of back then, but he's a cerebral player, knows exactly what he's doing, how to help his team, is really sort of selfless in that regard. But Jason, very much in that style of he makes very little mistakes, you don't notice him, but like he's so consistent, especially mostly playing Zarya, did a lot of work on that, and that's still not easy, especially when you're running against comps that are trying to run like Wrecking Ball or Hammond or Hamtaro, whatever you want to call him. Just to sort of be able to, like, for Flag Gaming, I started off sort of being like, yeah, they ran cheese comp, but they stuck to their guns so well, and they seem to be able to run into Moss 7 Club. Even on the cast, I've just read it says Moss Club 7. Like somebody's even written it in on the VOD, so that's probably why. Like officially, somebody's
it's probably him.
We gotta talk to our VOD people.
So it just sort of feels like they had their strategy, they stuck to it, they struggled in some areas, but like no, we'll keep going. So I think Jason is almost a sleeper pick. How he plays against LGD in the semi-final, I think if Flag Gaming go through to the final, it'll be an upset. But I think everybody will be looking at Jason and going, "Okay, this guy's for real."
Him versus Eileen is going to be a huge DPS matchup. I think I can't wait to see that.
I'm personally afraid of players who just have regular names. Like if your name is like Death Slayer 69, I'm like, well, this guy's projecting a little bit. But his name's like Bob. I have no idea how to read Bob. He could be nice, he could be nasty. So that's
Cool Matt 69.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah, like that's a mix of both. He had to drop the 69, but he really didn't, because that's
it's on his jersey now.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's now immortalized.
Power from. Yeah, Jason's definitely my pick.
So, are all of you guys going with LFC and LGD as the favorites to go to the grand final? If you had to lock in a prediction.
Yeah.
My prediction is definitely LFC beating T1W. LGD versus Flag Gaming, honestly, I don't know. I want to give it to LGD though. If I had to, like, if there's a gun to my head, I'd pick LGD. If there is no gun to my head,
I'm not.
It feels like a royal road. It feels like a royal road for LGD Gaming, even though like the favorites going through their thing, just because
they have to go through a lot of tough games.
They make such a fucking struggle for themselves. Like it feels like you're the better team. It's like you just sort of have people there like biting fingernails.
If the royal road is like when you if the royal road is where you come in and you're like rookies, right, and you end up completing it. I think what you're describing is Rainbow Road, because that is absolute dog
You just
shit.
go off at random points where you're not supposed to.
And not the new version, not the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe version, the old N64 version. You go all 3 laps and you can do.
You just keep fucking yourself over all the time.
Yeah. What's that game that caused Birdring to get his injury? The one where you
getting over it.
That's basically
getting over it
where he smashed his desk.
That's basically LGD. It's like they're playing getting over it. Just like they're doing amazing things, and you're like, I can't believe you got there, but Christ, you just watched them fail like 10 to 20 times doing it. That it's like, and then you would have thought by this point you'd have sort of nailed it. And it's fun to watch. They're definitely one of my favorite teams to watch because they have the potential to do some like amazing stuff. They run right in the center of having the crazy stuff like Moss 7 Club, but also having the consistent plays of like LFC. So it's nice to see a little bit more zany stuff coming out of them, but they're also very good at what they're doing.
And both of those games, I believe, are going to be going down on August the 25th. Whatever time zone you're in, I don't know. Go and check it.
It's like I think it's like 8 a.m. that game starts.
Early for us, man.
It's like midnight and like
3 a.m.
Pacific
call
time.
again, probably.
Yeah, but that's in almost 2 weeks. So check out those semifinals if you're interested in watching Chinese contenders. I think you definitely should, just to be able to see. Like, I'm really interested in this region now with the report of Guangzhou. I'm going to have to learn how to pronounce this fucking city. Or maybe I won't have to if the report is not correct. I can neither confirm nor deny.
Place your bets.
Yeah, exactly. So, exactly. Okay, I'm safe. Yeah, so I think it's a really good time to start digging into Chinese Contenders if you haven't seen it before, because I would expect that at least a portion of this talent pool is going to get picked up for either that or for
Yeah.
a rebuild of Shanghai Dragons, because I think going with
You can
full
seem
Korean
really
rosters is
smart
gonna
to your
happen.
friends by
Yeah,
like
exactly.
scouting out talent
Like,
beforehand.
I
This is the
watched
time to
I
do that.
watched Shy and Eileen when they were on LG.
I woke up at 5 a.m.
Exactly.
It's like the
Yeah,
Apex
wow.
thing all over again.
People love
But
projecting in the Overwatch
Yeah.
community as
It's
well.
like when your grandparents I walked 20 miles in the snow to school. It's like
Yeah.
They
Back
never
in my
did.
day.
They never did.
they
back
never
It's
in my
absolute
day.
bullshit. Like, how often
Yeah.
did it snow, Grandma? We live in fucking England. It snows about once
What
a year.
to death. Like, come on.
Yeah,
Why do you not have permanent damage from frostbite?
yeah, ridiculous. All right, thank you very much for joining me, guys, and giving me your expert insight on the Chinese Contenders regions. If you want to catch them, their Twitter handles have been underneath their faces the entire time. You morons. It begins with an at, of course, it's the Twitter handle.